So we are extremely fortunate to welcome Professor Ratna Dutta Sharma to this 1 week long course on Indian philosophy. Ratna Di is a teacher to many of us. She taught at the Department of Philosophy, Jadavpur University for 20 years, 28 years. After she has actually rendered 10 years of service to different institutions. She specializes in the area of Indian epistemology, Indian metaphysics, Indian logic, ethics, social and political philosophy, and also for which we all really are grateful to her, philosophy of Ayurveda. She has authored many books, of which I mention a few: Philosophical Discourse, Nyaya Dershane Nigrahasthan, Theory of Argumentation, Tradition and Modern, Bhāṣarbhogyo Sammato Pramano Tattva, which is her most recent one, Patient-Physician Relationship, Dharmoniti or Shruti, Refugees, Marriage, Ashura, and Varied Anthology on Applied Ethics, which came out in 2 volumes. Without further delay, I welcome Professor Dutta Sharma to make her presentation. Over to you, Ratna.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. I'm really thankful to all of you who have invited me, who has given me chance to talk, to discuss the matter with all of you. So I have designed the whole discussion in such a manner. The topic is on Hetvābhāṣa, as suggested by Nirmallo. I have designed the discussion in such a way that would be helpful to understand the nature of inference as it has been considered in the Indian philosophy in general and Nyaya philosophy in particular. It will be helpful to understand the nature of inference. I think it will throw light on the nature of Indian logic as well. And I think it will add something to the Nyaya concept of Prama and Pramano. We are already familiar with all these concepts, but I have arranged the discussion in such a manner that the discussion on Hetvābhāṣa will throw light on these other padarthas as well. I think so. Let's start. We all know the word Hetvābhāṣa may be interpreted or derived in 2 different ways, to yield 2 different meanings, though not totally unrelated. It may be derived as Hetu-bad avhāṣate. That means it merely appears as a Hetu, but not actually so. In this sense, it stands for a defective Hetu. And it can be derived as Hetu avhāṣa. In that case, it stands for some fault or defect in the Hetu. And the defective Hetu definitely suffers from some of these defects. So these 2 senses are not totally unrelated, but different. Now, the expression Hetu may mean 2 things: Karano Hetu and Onumapoko Hetu. X can be regarded as the Karano Hetu of Y if Y depends for its origination on X. On the other hand, X can be regarded as the Onumapoko Hetu of Y if Y, inferential cognition of Y, depends on the knowledge of X, or rather, X can be inferred on the basis of Y. To speak more specifically, X can be inferred on the basis of the knowledge of Y. So, the expression hetu can be taken in these two different senses. In our present discussion, the second sense is relevant. That means onumapoko hetu, which can be used as a ground for inference. Now, so this naturally leads us to the discussion on the nature of inference. Without understanding the nature of inference, it is not possible to discuss on Hetvābhāṣa. Now, what is Onumanu? Onumanu is admitted by most of the Indian systems, Indian schools, as Pramanu, or for the timing, as the Korono of Prama. But the different schools of Indian philosophy maintain that inference is a cognitive process. It's a cognitive process which admits of a causal explanation. If we if we concentrate on the Bhāṣya on Nyaya-Sutra defining Onumano, we will see that Vatshana has made a psychological analysis, made an analysis of the psychological process of inferential cognition. Let us concentrate on this process, causal process, through which inferential cognition can be attained according to the Nyaya-Vaisesika. First of all, let us proceed with the help of our familiar example. Suppose one is trying to infer fire in the hill. This is our stock example. One cannot infer fire in the hill if he doesn't know that the hill is characterized by smoke. Again, it is impossible for him, if he doesn't know smoke to be invariably related to fire. At the first stage, he had the perceptual cognition, or he has first perceived smoke coming out of the field. Previously, he had the perception of invariable relation of smoke and fire. And this perception of smoke coming out of the hill helps him to remember that smoke is invariably related to fire. It is known as the relation of pervasion. He recollects it. But we all know that recollection necessarily presupposes the non-recollective awareness of the same thing which is being recollected. So he is remembering the invariable relation. He perceived it earlier. So this recollective awareness is dependent on the previous non-recollective awareness of the invariable relation. But the matter to know is that, the point to note is that this non-recollective awareness of the relation of bhakti doesn't actually constitute a step in the whole process of inference. It has been destroyed long before. So it doesn't come under the actual process of inferring. Then he remembered that smoke is invariably related to fire. This remembrance leads to another perception called paramorsho, where the inferer perceives that the hill possesses such smoke which is invariably related to fire. From this, he infers or he arrives at the inferential cognition of fire in the hill. So in short, according to the Nyaya-Vaisesika, the knowledge of smoke coming out of hill, the recollective awareness of the invariable relation of bhakti and paramorsho, all these three constitute the causal conditions for inferential cognitions. They are known as Pokshodharmata Gyano, Bhakti Smriti, and Paramorsho. These three form the causal conditions for inferential cognitions according to the Nyaya-Vaisesika. The causal conditions are called Anumano. Though it is true that some of these conditions are singled out and called the corona of Anumiti and Anumano in a very technical sense. Now, the point to note is that of all these three, Hetu is the common element. Of these three cognitions forming the causal conditions for inferential cognition, Hetu is the common element. And another important point to note is that these three states of cognition are causally related. The perception of smoke in the heel generates the recollective awareness of the relation of pervasion. It again gives rise to paramorsho of the form. The heel possesses such smoke which is invariably related to fire. So, of these three, the first one gives rise to the second one gives rise to the third, which ultimately leads to the inferential cognition. Now, from this discussion, it is clear that the Indian philosophers in general and the Nyaya-Vaisekas in particular do not subscribe to the linguistic or argument view of inference. Now, what is an argument? An argument is a body of sentences related by way of the relation of implication. The implying sentences or sentences are called premises. And the implied sentence is known as conclusion. The Indian philosophers do not analyze inference into premise and conclusion. Now, if we look into the internal structure of the cognitive states constituting the entire inferential process, we find that they involve three elements. What are they? Basic three elements. Poksho, or the subject of inference. Shadho, the inferable property. And the Hetu, the ground of inference. Now, the point to note is that all these are padarthos, referent of the padus, and not padus. They are padarthos. And each of them has to fulfill certain conditions in order to play their specific role in inference. For instance, the Hetu, it is by virtue of the inferential relation with the Shadho, the Hetu acts as the inferential mark of the inference. So, all these are padarthos, and anything cannot act as poksho, anything cannot act as shadho, anything whatsoever cannot act as hetu. Whatever is to be regarded as the hetu that which has got invariable relation with the predicate of inference or shadho. By virtue of this relation, it can act as a hetu of an inference. And the inferential relation doesn't hold between the premise and the conclusion, but it holds between two elements. Which form the content of knowledge preceding inferential cognition. That means it holds between the hetu and the shadhu. The inferential cognition is considered by them as proma. Means, what does it mean? That resulting inferential cognition is considered by them as proma. What does it mean? It represents the objective situation, or it can represent the objective situation as it actually is. It corresponds with the fact. Now, even though they do not subscribe to the argument or linguistic view of inference, they admit pararthanumano, a specific type of inference, specific type of onumano, in contrast to sharthanumano, where the employment of language is a must. They do not subscribe to the linguistic theory, but they admit a specific type of onumano called pararthanumano, where the employment of a particular sort of language is a must. Now, what is the distinction between sharthanumano and pararthanumano? We have noted that three states of cognition, namely the knowledge of the hetu as existing in the poksha, the recollective awareness of the relation of bhakti, three, paramorsho, all these constitute the causal conditions for inferential cognition to occur. Now, in the case of sharthanumano, the inferer himself is capable of acquiring all these states of cognition. And on the basis of and utilizing these states of cognition, he inferentially arrives at the original position. But in the case of pararthanumano, the inferer is not capable of acquiring these causal conditions for inferring. Other person helps him to have those states of cognition. And naturally, in order to help him, to equip him for inferring, he gives rise to these states of cognition in him. For this purpose, he makes use of a series of insertions. He helps him to get the required states of cognition, which act as a causal condition for inferential cognition, and utilizing those states of cognition acquired through the sentences employed by the speaker, he himself make use of these states of cognition and is capable of inferring the original position. This constitutes the basic difference between sharthanumano and pararthanumano. So, even though they do not, the Indian philosophers in general and Nyayicas in particular do not subscribe to the linguistic view of inference, they admit pararthanumano, where the employment of a particular type of language is a must. This is the difference between the two. And in order to give rise to the listener the required states of cognition, the speaker make use of a particular sentence. It's compound in nature. It is compound in nature. The sentence is known as Nyaya, and it is formed out of the simple sentences known as pratigya, hetu, udaharon, uponoy, and nigamono. They are employed in the order in which they are being stated. This is the standard Nyaya view. And the compound sentence generates inferential process in the listener, and particularly he is able to arrive at the inferential cognition by making use of all the states of cognition. Now, in this case, we find that in this type of inference, known as parathanumano, has been considered by the Nyayaikos to be employed specifically in the case of argumentation, or rather, argumentation has been considered by them as a paradigm case of parathanumano. In this case, what happens? There are two contending parties. Both are trying to establish their position. Why? In order to convince the other of his own position, so that it may be acceptable to him or her, to the listener. With this purpose, the contending parties try to justify their position. And in order to justify their position, they adduce evidence in favor of their position. And this is the evidence for the acceptance of my position. And in this case, we know in Indian philosophy, it is only a pramano that can act as evidence. So in this context, in order to justify his own position, the contestant adduces evidence. It is inferential in nature. He states an inferential process. How? He states the hetu in favor of his position. But as there is other contending party historically present there, he has to justify that the hetu which he has already adduced to justify his position is a legitimate one, or a shat hetu. With this intention, he first states the hetu, he first states of his own position, then states the ground or the logical ground or hetu. Then he has to justify that the hetu he has made use of is a legitimate one, or a shat hetu. And for this purpose, he has to show that, you see, the hetu which I have proposed possesses the required features for being treated as a proper or shat hetu. He has to justify his position in this way. For the justification of his own position, he adduces the hetu and then justifies that the hetu he has proposed has the features for being treated, for being regarded as the hetu proper. Now, this is impossible if there is no fixed features. There are no fixed features. There is no fixed feature to be satisfied by a hetu proper. It is impossible. So, there must be agreement, prior agreement, that these and these features, in case fulfilled by a particular hetu, can be regarded as a legitimate one or a proper one. Now, fine, in this case, the person who is justifying his position is making use of inference as evidence. Is putting forward an inferential process to justify his position. So here, he is making use of inference as evidence. But the listener is using this particular inference as a source of knowledge. So we find here Anumano or inference is functioning as both an evidence and the source of cognition. These are the two different functions rendered by the inference here, but by the said inference here. And we know Pramano serves two functions. It acts as the evidence and it acts as a source of knowledge. Here we find a distinction has been drawn between evidence and offering of evidence. For offering of evidence, the person justifying his position makes use of a particular form of language. We have called it Nyaya. So here we find that inference as a pramano serves as a evidence as well as it acts as a source of knowledge. Now, the person who is justifying his position has stipulated the conditions to be satisfied by Shathetu. Otherwise, it is not possible for him to show that the hetu I have made use of is a legitimate one. Why? You are saying that your hetu is a legitimate one or a proper one or a shathetu? Because it satisfies the features to be satisfied by a hetu proper. So there must be agreement among the Nyayikos regarding the features which are to be satisfied by hetu proper. What are these conditions? Now we have specified the causal conditions for inference. Now we are going to specify the validity conditions of an inference. These features which a shathetu is to be fulfilled, is to be satisfied, are considered by the Nyayikos as validity conditions. Shathetu has to satisfy all these features. So if we arrange this position in this way, it will stand thus. A shathetu, an inference, can be valid according to the Nyayikos if the logical ground or the hetu is short. Again, a hetu is short if it satisfies some definite features. So, the validity of an inference depends on the possession of the specific features on the part of the adduced hetu. So, these are the validity conditions for an inference. What are they? So, an inference is valid if the hetu is short. A hetu is short if it satisfies some specific features. So, an inference is valid if the proposed hetu possesses all the specific features. Now, what are these features? The features are like this. One, pokho shatto dharmo. The hetu, proper hetu, must characterize the poksho or the subject of inference. Number two, shapoksho shatto dharmo. The hetu must be present in the shapokho. Now, what is shapokho? Shapokho refers to the locus where the shraddho is known for certain to exist, but which is other than poksho. In our stock example, it is the hill is fiery as it possesses smoke. Here, we consider kitchen, etc. as the shapokshu, because here the existence of the shraddho, fire, is known for certain to exist. And third feature is vipakha shatto dharmo, absence of the hetu in the locus, having the absence of the shraddho for certain to exist. In our example, that which contains the absence of the Shadho for certain to exist is known as the Vipakho. In our stock example, lake can be regarded as Vipaksho, the legitimate, proper, or the sound hetu should not exist in the Vipakho. Now, the fourth feature is Asat Pratipakkhotva Dharma. The hetu, the proposed hetu, should not be capable of being challenged by any other equally forceful hetu, proving just the opposite of the Shadha of the first inference in the same Pukshu. If a particular Anumano intends to prove some Shadho in a Pokho on the basis of a hetu, there should not be any other equally forceful hetu possible. There should not be any other hetu, equally forceful hetu, which would be capable of proving just the opposite of this Shadho in the same Pokshu. It must be Asat Pratipakkhotva. It must have the Asat Pratipakkhotva Dharma. It should not be challenged by an equally forceful hetu, which is offered to prove just the opposite of the Shadho in the same Pokshu. The fifth feature is Abadhitattva Dharma. Contradictory of the Shadho should not be known for certain to exist in the same Pokho. In other words, it should not be subletted by any established source of knowledge. All these 5 features are not present in all types of hetu. But these features are to be satisfied by hetu which is Annayo Betireki in nature. What type of inference is considered as Annayo Betireki in nature? If both Shapokho, there are different types of specifying the nature of Annayo Betireki inference. I'm just stating one. If both Shapokho and Vipakho are available, this type of inference is regarded as Annayo Betireki Anumano. The hetu, in order to be regarded as a legitimate one, in order to be regarded as a short hetu, which is the hetu of Annayo Betireki Anumano, is to satisfy all these features. But the Annayo Anumano lacks Vipakho. And the Betireki Anumano lacks Shapokho. So Annayo Anumano cannot have Vipakha Sattva Dharma, and Betireki Anuman cannot have Shapokho Sattva Dharma. That's why Vachaspati Mishra has stated that Pancharupos Chaturupor Ba, the legitimate hetu is to satisfy 5 or 4 features as the case may be. It's clear that in the case of Annayo Anumano and in the case of Betireki Anumano, 5 features are not available. So, in that case, the fulfillment of the 4 features will be sufficient. That's why it has been put in this fashion, Pancharupos Chaturupor Ba. In order to be regarded as a proper hetu, legitimate hetu, short hetu, it must either fulfill all the 5 features as I have mentioned, or the 4 features, as the case may be. Now, let us concentrate on these validity conditions for an inference. First of all, we will concentrate on the last 2 features. That means the Asat Pratipakkhotva and Abadhitattva Dharma. Now, I am going to infer fire in the hill. If I know for certain that the hill possesses the absence of fire, should I take the trouble to infer fire in the hill? Is it rational for me? No. If I know that the hill possesses such thing which is invariably related to the absence of fire, should I make any attempt to infer fire in the hill? Definitely not. It is not rationally justified. If I am fully aware of the fact that the hill possesses the absence of fire, why should I make the attempt to infer fire in the hill? If I know there is something in the hill which is invariably related to the absence of fire, should I infer? Should I make any attempt to infer? Not at all. So, in this sense, what should I say? The Ashat Pratipakkhutva and Abadhitattva dharma of the Hetu constitutes the precondition of inference. I won't make any attempt to infer if I am aware of the fact that the Hetu is Shat Pratipakshito or is Badhito. In this sense, Ashat Pratipakkhutva dharma and Abadhitattva dharma of the Hetu constitutes the precondition of inference. Now, what about the other three features? To know the Poksha Sattva dharma of the Hetu is to have Poksha dharmata gyanu. And the knowledge of the Sapoksha Sattva and Vipakha Sattva dharma of the Hetu disjunctively constitute or gives rise to Bhakti gyanu. So, Poksha Sattva dharma of the Hetu gives rise to the Poksha dharmata gyanu, which is which forms one of the causal conditions for inferential cognition, and the knowledge of Sapoksha Sattva and Vipaksha Sattva dharma generates the knowledge of the invariable relation or Bhakti gyanu disjunctively. And there is no obvious why I'm making use of the expression disjunctively. And Paramarsha, according to the Nyayikos, gives rise to inferential cognition just immediately after it. Now, this Paramarsha depends for its origination on Bhakti and Pokkha Dharmata Gyan. So, Paramarsha is the causal condition for inferential knowledge in the sense that it generates inferential cognition just immediately after it. And this Paramarsha again depends for its origination on Bhakti Gyanu and Pokkha Dharmata Gyanu. And we have already specified that to know the Pokkha Sattva dharma of the Hetu is to have Poksha Dharmata Gyanu, and to know the Sapokkha Sattva and Vipakha Sattva dharma of the Hetu disjunctively give rise to the knowledge of Bhakti. It's impossible for one to have Paramarsha who is not aware of the relation of Bhakti and have Poksha Dharmata Gyanu. In this sense, Paramarsha depends on Bhakti Gyanu and Pokkha Dharmata Gyanu for its origination. Now, in the case of Parathanvanu, we have already said that there are two contending parties, each one. It is a paradigm case of Parathanvanu where two contending parties are present. Each one is making an attempt to justify his position, and for that reason, he is adducing Hetu for his position, justifying its legitimate character. That, you see, the Hetu I have made use of possesses all the required features for being treated as a proper or Shat Hetu. This is technically known as Kontakodharo. He makes use of the following sentences. I have already mentioned them. In our example, the sentences would be like this. Pratigga, the hill is fiery, as Hetu, as it has smoke. Udaharana, where there is smoke, there is fire. Uponayo, the hill possesses such smoke which is invariably related to fire, and Nigomano, therefore the hill is fiery. The first constituent, known as Pratigya, states the thesis to be defended by the proponent and identifies the Poksho and Shadhu of the Parathanuman. The second constituent, Hetu, states that the Poksho is characterized by the Hetu and thus is capable of producing Poksho Dharmata Gyanu. The third constituent, called Udaharanu, states the relation of Bhakti holding between the Hetu and Shadhu, and also it states an example where this relation has been actualized. In this way, that third constituent produces in the listener Bhakti Gyan. The fourth constituent states that the Hetu characterizes the Poksho, which is invariably related to the Shadho, and naturally generates Paramorsho. And the last step states that what was intended to be proved has already been proved. Now, we have discussed the different features which a short Hetu is to satisfy. Now, if any of these are the validity conditions for an inference, we have already stated. Now, if any of these conditions gets violated, it will be a case of defective Hetu or Hetvābhāṣa. When any of these conditions is violated, we have a case of Hetvābhāṣa, pseudo Hetu, not Hetu proper. Thus, a Hetu is Ashiddho if the first condition of short Hetu is violated. It is Viruddho if the second condition gets violated. It is Bhavichari or deviant if the third condition is not satisfied. It is Shat Pratipokkhito if the fourth condition remains unsatisfied. If the fifth condition is not fulfilled, it will be a case of Abadhito Hetu. So, the Hetvābhāṣas are the result of the violation of some or other conditions specified to be satisfied by a proper Hetu, short Hetu. So, Hetvābhāṣas are the result of the violations of the conditions of short Hetu. Now, Onumiti is, or inferential cognition, is considered by the Nyayikos as proma. But what, according to them, is the condition to be satisfied for being a proma? Let us take it for the time being that the expression proma means true knowledge for the time being. And true cognition, what is true cognition or true knowledge? True cognition, according to them, can be produced by a causal condition having some excellence. That means if the resulting cognition is to be regarded as proma, it must be produced by such causal condition or conditions which satisfy or satisfies some excellence, which have some excellence. This is quite consistent with their theory of Shoto Pramannobado, in respect of origination. That means our specific cognition X is veridical in nature or is proma. It results from certain conditions. The conditions which give rise to the cognition, veridical cognition, is not responsible for making it proma. If any of these stipulated conditions possesses some excellence or guno, that will help to make it proma. This is quite consistent with their Shatopramanobado. Truth is extrinsic in respect of its origination. That means the causal factors which help the cognition to come into being is not responsible for its being proma. It is the excellence or guno of some of these causal factors that is responsible for making it proma. Now, what is the case with this inferential cognition? According to them, it is the truth of the paramorsho that which gives rise to inferential cognition just immediately after it. It is responsible to make the resulting inferential cognition proma. In other words, to speak more specifically, if the paramorsho is true, then the resulting inferential cognition would be veridical in nature. So truth of the resulting cognition depends on the fact whether the paramorsho leading to this inferential cognition is true or not. Now, truth of the inferential cognition again depends on the actual existence of the relational complex represented by the cognition in the objective world. It consists in the correspondence with the fact. The fact is known as it actually is. It consists, so truth according to them consists in the correspondence with the fact. Paramorsho, which gives rise to inferential cognition, can be regarded as true if both Pokshodharmata Gyano and Vyaptik Gyano are true. We have already mentioned this point earlier. Now, the possession of the Pokshosattva Dharma makes the Pokshodharmata Gyano true. The possession of the Sapokshosattva and Vipakshosattva Dharma of the Hetu constitute the truth condition for the Vyaptik Gyano. So, in order to be regarded as a proma, the resulting inferential cognition must have such paramorsho as its generating condition, which is true. Again, the truth of the paramorsho depends on the truth of Pokshodharmata Gyano and Vyaptik Gyano. The truth of Pokshodharmata Gyano depends on the possession of Pokshosattva Dharma of the Hetu. Again, the truth of the Vyaptik Gyano depends on, in a certain situation, in some specific context, on Sapokshosattva and Vipakshosattva Dharma of the Hetu. That's why I have made use of the expression disjunctively. So, we see that paramorsho having both Vyaptik Gyano and Pokshodharmata Gyano as its causal condition, which are both true, can only yield a true inferential cognition. Inferential cognition is veridical if and only if paramorsho is true, and the truth of paramorsho again depends on Vyaptik Gyano and Pokshodharmata Gyano. Again, the truth of Pokshodharmata Gyano depends on the satisfaction, on the fulfillment of the Pokshosattva Dharma of the Hetu, and the satisfaction of Sapokshosattva and Vipakshosattva Dharma disjunctively constitute the truth condition for the Bhakti Jnani. Now, after this much, we can say that of these 5 features to be satisfied by a proper logical ground, 2 of these 5 features, the last 2, have direct bearing on the truth of the inferential cognition, resulting inferential cognition. The inferential cognition of the fire in the hill cannot be regarded as true if the hill is already known for certain to be characterized by the absence of fire. That means if the hetu is badhito, then the inferential cognition of fire in the hill cannot be true. How can it be true? Because the absence of fire is already there. This state of cognition wouldn't correspond with the fact, so it will not be true. If the hill, as a matter of fact, possesses fire, then the inference the hill is fiery would be true. But if it is already ascertained to possess the absence of fire, how can the inference of fire be true? This is impossible if the hetu is not abadhito. To be badhito is to be contradicted. But when a hetu is said to be contradicted, what is actually contradicted? It is the inferential cognition attained through this hetu or on the basis of the hetu is contradicted. What is being inferred is contradicted by the fact itself. That's why the inference cannot yield truth. On the other hand, if the hetu is shatpratipokshito, then what is the case? We are constructing an inference, making use of a particular hetu to prove some shraddha in the poksho, but at the same time, it's possible to formulate another inference, making use of an equally forceful hetu, which will prove just the absence of the first shraddha in the same poksho. In this case, what happens? There is ample scope that the first or the second inference of not being the correct one, not being revealing the truth or being true, there is ample scope for their being false. If I try to infer fire in the hill by making on the basis of a certain hetu, and if it is possible at the same time to find such hetu which is proving the absence of fire in the same hill, now these two contradictory inferences cannot be both true at the same time. So at least one of them must be false. So the chance of the inference being false is there. It cannot be regarded as true. So the non-fulfillment of these two conditions, last two conditions, make the inferential cognition false or not true at least. So they have direct bearing on the truth of the inferential resulting inferential cognition. And we have said that these two conditions, if remains unsatisfied, the resulting inferential cognition cannot yield the truth. So these two features have direct bearing on the truth of the resulting cognition, and other 3 features have indirect bearing on the truth of the resulting cognition. So what we see, if the hetu is short in possessing all the 5 features, all 4 features as the case may be, the resulting inferential cognition must be true. The required features for being regarded as valid on the part of an inference ensures its truth of the resulting inferential cognition as well as the causal conditions for it. So, the validity conditions entail truth of the resulting inferential cognition as well as the truth of the causal conditions for these inferential cognitions. The features of the Shot Hetu are formulated in such a way that their fulfillment ensures the truth of the inferential cognition and its causal conditions also. So, if the hetu of a particular inference is sound in fulfilling all the required conditions, the resulting inferential cognition must be true. Not only that, the other causal conditions for, namely, Vyaptigyano, Pokhodharmatagyano, and Paramasho are also true. On the other hand, if the resulting inferential cognition is false, one of the validity conditions is surely violated. So, we are not satisfied with mere validity. We have stipulated, or the Nyayikas have stipulated the validity conditions in such a way that they ensure the truth. Now, what does it mean to say that the inferential cognition is true? The truth of a cognition, according to the Nyayikas, depends on the actual existence of the relational complex represented by the cognition in the objective world. So, the cognition is true if it corresponds with the fact, to say roughly. But is it sufficient condition for being regarded as proma? Tadbhati tat prakarako gyano is equivalent to proma or not? I think it is not sufficient for being regarded as proma. Why? The ground is that it is a necessary condition indeed, but it is not a sufficient condition. Why? It must, in addition, be promanojonno. So, promanojonno constitutes one of the distinguishing features of a proma. It must be tadbhati tat prakarako. It must correspond with the fact, no doubt. But this is not sufficient for its being regarded as proma. It must, in addition, be resulting from the operation of promano. Now, the question naturally would arise. It will involve circularity indeed, because promano has been defined as the corona of proma. And if you again say proma is that which is originated by the operation of promano, which is a result of promano, then these two definitions should involve circularity. The answer is, they are not defining, the Nyayikas are not defining proma in terms of promano as promanojonyo, but they have defined proma as tadbhati tat prakarako gyano. But it may not have been used as a defining property of proma, but there is no ground to deny that proma possesses this particular feature. A particular definiendum may possess more than one property, but all the properties are not taken into consideration in formulating the definition of that thing. Same is the case with proma. Proma has been defined in a manner, but it is true that it must be produced by promano. It has not been counted, or it has not been regarded as a defining property of proma. Maybe this will create the situation of circularity. This will give rise to a false circularity. That's why it has been not treated as a defining property, but the property is there because the proma and promano, the causal relation between proma and promano has been admitted. Promano is the cause of proma. Now, if proma is there, its cause promano must be there. There is no ground to deny it. It cannot be doubted. So, that the proma is resulting from the operation of promano is an undoubted fact. It is not a question of definition. It is a question of fact, regarding the fact. If proma results, it must result due to the operation of promano. So the causal relation holds. But the question is, can we specify any situation where the resulting cognition is tadvati tat prakarako, but cannot be regarded as proma? I think it can definitely be mentioned. I just select one case. It is a case of Vranto Pratarako Bhakyo. A person is under delusion. That, for instance, a meeting is going to be held or an examination is going to be held on 25th January. He knows it wrongly. X knows it wrongly, is under the false impression that the math examination is going to be held on 25th January. He knows it wrongly. Now, some other student is asking him, do you know what's the scheduled date for maths exam? In order to deceive him, he's saying that, yes, I know, it is going to be held on 22nd January. Now, as a matter of fact, the examination is scheduled to be held on 22nd January. So, if the person, in order to deceive the other student, utters the sentence that it is going to be held on 22nd January with the intention of deceiving him, then the listener will have a veridical cognition in the sense that it is tatpati tat prakarako. He was under the impression that it is going to be held on 25th January. And in order to deceive the other person, he utters that it is going to be held on the 22nd January. And as a matter of fact, it is scheduled to be held on 22nd January. Then the sentence which the Bhranto Pratarako utters gives rise to a veridical cognition in the listener. But is it a case of proma? No, definitely it is not a case of proma. So the point to note is that the resulting, it is not enough for the proma to be tadvati tat prakarako, but the process through which it has been reached must be legitimate or proper. The process must be legitimate. It is not enough for the proma to be quite in accordance, quite in fitting with the fact. The process through which it is attained must be legitimate. I think this point has been emphasized in this discussion. There's the validity conditions. It is not enough for the resulting inferential cognition to be tadvati tat prakarako in order to be regarded as proma. The method which has been adapted to reach this inferential cognition also must be legitimate. And this will be ensured by the fact that the hetu is short. Now, what about? So, we are all acquainted with the Nyaya notion of proma, but I think we know that proma is tadvati tat prakarako gyano, but I think these instances suggest that in addition to these, it must be it must be resulting through a legitimate process. It must originate from the operation of pramano. This fact is to be equally emphasized. Now, what about pramano? What about pramano itself? We know some causal conditions which are common to both veridical and non-veridical cognition. Let us take the instance of perceptual cognition. In the veridical cognition also, the veridical perceptual cognition also results from the sense-object contact, and non-veridical cognition for perceptual non-veridical cognition also results from sense-object contact. But in one case, the cognition is veridical. The other instance is the instance of non-veridical cognition. Why? What makes this difference? This is due to the fact that in one case, the causal condition is qualified samguna. If for each instance of proma, there is a guna by which its karuno must be qualified. In order to be regarded as proma karuno, one causal condition is to satisfy another feature. It must be qualified by samguna. In the case of the perceptual veridical cognition, in the case of perceptual illusion, the common causal condition is sense-object contact. But in one case, it is veridical. The other instance is non-veridical. Why? In one case, the sense-object is in contact with the possessor of the property, which figures as a qualifier in the resulting perceptual cognition. This constitutes the guna. In one case, the sense organ is in contact of the object, in contact with the object, which is the actual possessor of the property. Which property? That figures as the qualifier in the resulting perceptual cognition. But in another case, it is not. That's why this case is non-veridical perceptual cognition. This is a case of non-veridical perceptual cognition, but the other one is veridical because here the causal condition satisfies an essential condition as being the possessor of a guna. I think this matter also have been emphasized by the stipulation of the conditions of Shot-Hetu. Now the question is, why did the Nyayikas give so much emphasis on the discussion of Hetvābhāṣa? They have allotted a lot of pages for the discussion of the nature of Hetvābhāṣa. Why? Why is it so important for them? We all know that Maharishi Gautama, the founder of the Nyaya system, tried to construct a theory of argumentation. And it was inevitable for him to give so much emphasis on Hetvābhāṣa. Why? Because all cases of Anumana Bhāṣa or pseudo-inference are also cases of pseudo-reason or Hetvābhāṣa. We have already, and vice versa. We have already mentioned this point. Now, one who knows when a particular hetu becomes defective, he can guard himself against making employment of such a hetu. He can resist himself from making use of such a defective hetu. And if the opponent in the context of argumentation makes use of such defective hetu, it would be easier for one who is quite acquainted with the theory of proper hetu, short hetu, to detect it. So, in the context of argumentation, it can be used as a very, very powerful tool for defeat and to win the argumentation process. In the context of argumentation, if a participant is acquainted with the theory of Shothetu and the Hetvābhāṣas resulting due to the violations of this stipulated condition, he can at least guard himself against making use of any Ashothetu and can detect if the opponent has made use of some Ashothetu or not. It will be easier for him. So, the nature of Hetvābhāṣa is to be known to him properly. Now, if it is possible to detect that the opponent has made use of some defective logical ground, then certainly it would constitute his point of defeat. If I can point out that my opponent, in the context of argumentation, has made use of a defective logical ground, then certainly it would constitute a defeat situation for him. He will be declared as defeated. So it will be a case of his Nigrahasthano. So Hetvābhāṣa, detection of Hetvābhāṣa gives rise to a defeat situation of the person whose Hetu is being detected as defective. So Hetvābhāṣa comes under the head of Nigrahasthano. Then why Gautama has mentioned it separately? Because in the first sutra, he has made, even though Hetvābhāṣa comes under the head of Nigrahasthano, or Hetvābhāṣa constitutes the ground of one's defeat in the context of argumentation, still he has mentioned Hetvābhāṣa separately. In the first sutra of Nyaya Dershane, where he specified the different objects to be studied, which are going to be studied by Nyaya Dershane, he has mentioned Hetvābhāṣa separately. What's the ground for it? If it constitutes a defeat situation for a participant in the context of argumentation, that it comes under the head of Nigrahasthano. Why has it been mentioned as separately as Hetvābhāṣa? The answer seems to be that Hetvābhāṣas no doubt can be used as a powerful tool for the defeat of the opponent. But the notion of victory or defeat is relevant only in the context of hostile debate. To use Charuko's terminology, Bigrigjo Sambhāṣa. But in the case of friendly debate or Sandhaya Sambhāṣa, there is no scope for detecting the fault in the other's position for his defeat. In the case of friendly debate, it is not the case. In the case of friendly debate, the goal is to attain the truth. Now, how it would be relevant there? Yes, of course. In the case of friendly debate, the goal is to attain the truth. But if any of the participants make use of a defective hetu, the goal will remain unattained. So, if the goal is to attain the truth, the defect in the, if there be any in the defect in the logical ground, in the hetu, it must be pointed out. So Hetvābhāṣas are to be pointed out in the context of argumentation, which is guided solely by the desire to attain the truth. As we have seen, we know very well, all of us are quite acquainted with these facts, that Hetvābhāṣas have been treated as orthodosha in contrast to shabdodoshas. Hetvābhāṣas are more stronger ground on which the opponent can be defeated for making use of a defective logical ground in this sense. That's why in the case of argumentation, which is solely guided by the desire to attain the truth, the detection of Hetvābhāṣa is a must in order to emphasize the fact, yes, if it is pointed out against the position of the opponent, it will constitute his defeat situation. But in the context of argumentation, which is solely guided by the desire to attain the truth, there is no scope for defeat. Still, in those contexts also, Hetvābhāṣa, if employed, must be detected for the achievement of the desired goal. In order to emphasize the fact, in spite of coming under the head of Nigrahasthan, Hetvābhāṣa has been mentioned distinctly by Gautama in the first Nyaya Sutra, while he specified the objects going to be discussed in Nyaya Dershane. Now, it's true that the form of argumentation which is guided by the sole desire to attain the truth also can be regarded as a context of defeat or to win. Of course, the expressions defeat, etc., to be taken in a slightly different sense. In this, some have used this expression also to indicate that the context of Nyaya-Vaisesika or Vadu is also a case of defeat or to win. What is the sense? Now, they have specified the sense in this way that the defeat constitutes in failing to achieve the desired goal. If my desired goal is to attain the truth, if I fail to do it, then I am defeated. In this extended sense, the context of Nyaya-Vaisesika or Bado also can be regarded as a context of defeat, taking the word defeat in an extended sense, failure to achieve the desired goal. In this point, we can mention a point that at this level, it is not out of the point if I mention that according to some, Hetvābhāṣas can only be pointed out in the context of Parathanumanu. We have come across this view in Dharmakirti, in some of the Vaisesika philosophers also believed in this position, that Hetvābhāṣas are to be detected only in the case of Parathanumanu. But it is not universally accepted. The reason for this might be that in the context of argumentation, there are opponents who can detect fault in the position of the other participant. But this is not universally accepted. So it is an exceptional view according to which Hetvābhāṣas can be pointed out only in the case of Parathanumanu, but this view is not universally admitted. So we have seen that detection of the fact that the opponent has made use of a defective logical ground would constitute a defeat situation for him in argumentation. So it is a very powerful tool. But I want to state a case of argumentation, and my question would be, what purpose would be served if you argue like this? We know that Anupalabdhi has been admitted by the Vattumimamsakas as a distinct Pramanu, through which absence gets apprehended. But the Nyayikas do not believe in this, in their position. They don't admit Anupalabdhi Pramanu. According to them, that which helps to ascertain a particular fact is equally helpful for ascertaining its absence. If X is known by Y, then Y is sufficiently capable of making the non-existence or absence of X obvious. The sense organ which help to ascertain the existence of a particular object is equally applicable to ascertain the non-existence of the object. They don't agree with the Bhattu position. Now, the Bhattu-Mīmaṅsakas admit non-apprehension in the form of absence of recollection. Sharananupalabdhi. Suppose someone asking me, do you remember X to be present in the morning in the class? I say, no, I can't remember. According to the Bhattu-Mīmaṅsakas, if I say that I can't remember X to be present in the class in the morning, it is indicative of his absence in the morning in the class. So, this absence of recollection makes us know the absence of that particular individual during that time in that specific space. The Nyayikos contradict their position. They consider it as an instance of inference. Suppose someone asking me, do you remember X to be present in the morning in the class? I say no. The Nyayikos would interpret this instance as an instance of inference. They will say, I will infer X is absent in the morning in that place, as he is not recollected by me to be present there in the morning. So it can very well be known, the absence of X in the morning in the class can very well be known through an inference. If I fail to remember him to be present in that time, during that time, in that particular place, it indicates that he was absent there. So the non-apprehension or anupalabdhi in the form of absence of recollection helps to ascertain the absence of X, for instance. The Nyayikos contradict it by saying that there is no need to admit non-apprehension as a distinct pramano. It can very well be ascertained through inference. What would be the form of inference? X is absent in the morning in the class because he is not being remembered by me to be present at that time in the class. Now the opponent Bhattu-Mīmaṅsakas raised this objection against the Nyayikos. You have made use of the absence of recollection as a hetu. Now the knowledge of the hetu as characterizing the poksho is a necessary prerequisite for inferential cognition. Now how you would ascertain the absence of the hetu in the poksho? The Nyayikos answered, it is not at all impossible for us because recollection is a state of cognition. A cognition is ascertained on the basis of Hetvābhāṣa. So, absence of recollection also can be ascertained on the basis of Hetvābhāṣa or the knowledge resulting from the operation of monos as korono. So the Nyayikos answer, it is not at all impossible for us to ascertain the hetu in the poksho because recollection is a form of cognition and a cognition is apprehended by us through Hetvābhāṣa. And it is that very Hetvābhāṣa we can ascertain the absence of cognition itself. Because that thing is ascertained in a specific way, according to them, that specific way, its absence also can be ascertained. So, Hetvābhāṣa helps us to know the absence of recollection. Now, the Bhattu-Mīmaṅsakas. So, the charge of the Bhattu-Mīmaṅsakas was that your hetu is ashiddho. Now, the Nyayikos answers, how? Why? We admit Hetvābhāṣa as the apprehender, the nature of a previous cognition. So the absence of that cognition also can be apprehended through Hetvābhāṣa. It is not difficult for us to ascertain the hetu. Bhattu-Mīmaṅsakas say, we don't agree with you. We admit that a particular state of cognition can be apprehended through Gatata Lingako Anumano, not through Hetvābhāṣa. We don't admit it. So your hetu is vitiated by the defect known as ashiddho. The Nyayikos argue, no, we admit that can very well be apprehended through Hetvābhāṣa? No, come to the point. How this charge of the defective hetu brought against the Nyayikos would operate, because the Bhattamimamsakos who are bringing this charge is guided by their certain presuppositions. And the Nyayikos, namely, in this case, that a state of cognition is apprehended through Hetvābhāṣa. The Nyayikos thinking it to be Hetvābhāṣa, and the Bhattamimamsakos admit that a cognition can be apprehended only through a Gatatalingokonomiti. Now, if the Bhattamimamsakos who are raising the objection of Ashiddhi against the hetu adduced by the Nyayikos is guided by certain basic tenets of their theory. And the Nyayikos, on the other hand, who is answering to the objection, is also, Nyayikos are also guided by some basic presupposition, basic tenets of their theory, of their system. Now, if we argue like this, that in my system, I admit it, that's why your logical ground or hetu is defective. And the answer is given in this mode that no, on the part of our system, there is no difficulty to prove that, to have the knowledge of the logical ground, because we subscribe to this theory. Now, if both the objection and answer to the objection are guided by the basic presuppositions, basic tenets of the two contending parties, then is it possible to reach any conclusion? What should be the method of argumentation in this context? Will the purpose served? Whether it will be able to serve the purpose by raising the objection that you have given rise to a defeat situation by making use of a defective logical ground? No. I think the solution is not so easy. Now the question is, another question is, gee, at what stage of argumentation one is to detect that the opponent has made use of a defective logical ground? The answer is that if he can point out other defects in his position, then there is no need to point out the defect pertaining to the logical ground. Why? The cause has been shown in this way, pranidhana gammattad, because the detection of fault in the hetu demands thorough consideration of the situation. You have to be acquainted with the features of the proper logical ground. You have to see whether this particular hetu has satisfied all the features or not. If not, which particular condition has failed to be satisfied. That's why it has given rise to this fault of the hetu. So, to point out the defect in the hetu takes time. And it's a very difficult task. It demands critical consideration. It demands thought, pranidhana gammu. That's why if other faults like this, that suppose a Nyayiku is arguing with his opponent, whether he had made use of all the 5 steps or not is obviously revealed. If he fails to make use of any of the argument constituent, then it can easily be detected. So it has been suggested that if other defects can be pointed out, there is no reason to point out the defect pertaining to the logical ground. It should be, in case you fail to point out all other forms of defects in argumentation of the opponent, then you proceed to find out, of course, if there be any defect in the proposed logical ground. Otherwise not. It comes at the last stage of detection of fault pertaining to the opponent's position. As the detection of the Hetvābhāṣa in the opponent's position is very difficult and time-consuming, it demands thorough knowledge of the essential features of the short hetu, etc., etc. But if it's possible to point out the defect, which is obvious, point it out for his defect. If in case you fail to detect all the other defects, then try to find out whether it suffers from any defect of the hetu or not. But I have already cited the case where it is very difficult to understand if the argumentation process continues like this, what would be the effect of pointing out a defect in the logical ground of the opponent? If both the proponent and opponent argues guided by their basic presumptions, basic presuppositions, then what will be the effect? It's my question. The answer is not so obvious. So you have to think over whether it will serve any real purpose. If the argumentation now shifts their actual point of disagreement, the basic tenets which are guiding them in this instance can be challenged. And in that case, the point of argumentation, the topic of argumentation would be changed. It would not remain the same. If now the Nyayikas argue like this against the Bhattos, no, it is impossible to apprehend cognition by Gatata Linga Konumanu. In that case, the point of disputation would be this, not the previous one. So the point of disputation would be changed. So how the optimum result is to be achieved through this form of argumentation remains to be a question. My last question is whether it is possible to point out all the defects or more than one defect in the logical ground, in the hetu, in the adduced hetu. The answer is yes. We can cite an example where all the 5 defects can be pointed out. Let us take an example. This cow is horse as it is characterized by pothood. This cow is horse as it is characterized by pothood is an instance where it's possible to point out all the 5 defects in the logical ground. Now, my question is how to admit this case. If we admit this case, how to accommodate it with the principle of classification? Because the principle of classification restricts that the subdivided classes would be contradictory to each other, in the sense that a single member cannot belong to these subclasses at the same time, at the same place. So, my question is, does it indicate that the principle of classification of Hetvābhāṣa gets violated if it is possible for us to find out a case where all the 5 types of Hetvābhāṣas can be detected? Does it not contradict the principle of classification? With this, I conclude my discussion. Thank you all.
Thank you, Ratna Di. Thank you so much. It was so detailed and so absolutely pranjal. Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
I have taken much time.
No, you haven't. No, you haven't. It's all worth it. Please, participants, if you have any queries, come forward. You can ask even in Bangla, so don't hesitate.
Ma'am, I have one question. I have not understood what is orthodosh and shabdodosh.
Yes.
Can you please explain a little
Sure.
bit?
two types of doshos have been distinguished. If you go through the benedictory verse of Nyaya-Kushumanjali, you will find the expression anogho. It indicates shabdo dosho in contrast to artho dosho. For instance, let us take an example. If the argument, if the hetu adduced by a proponent is defective, then it constitutes artho dosho, because it is a defect pertaining to the constituent of an inference. But if the proponent makes use of three sentences, pratigya, hetu, udaharan, and doesn't make use of the last two sentences, that means altogether he is making use of three sentences in order to adduce the hetu in favor of his position and to justify its legitimate character, then he is not making use of all the required sentences, and it is obvious, then he is committing. If it is pointed out that you have failed to produce all the 5 sentences required in this context, then it will suffer from shabdo dosho. Is it clear to you?
Okay, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Clear now.
RQ?
Ma'am, can I
Yes,
ask?
sure.
Ma'am, Hetvābhāṣa, in which category we can reduce? Actually, according to Nyaya-Vaisesika, there are 7 categories: দ্রব্যগুণ, কর্ম সামান্য বিশেষ, সমবায়, and অভাব. So, in which category we can reduce Hetvābhāṣa?
Actually, you have seen this line in Nyaya-Vaisesika, that this classification of padarthos is not contradictory to that of the Nyayaikos. They have not classified objects in this manner. Still, it is not quite contradictory to the Nyaya position, because their classification can be subsumed under the head of these 7 categories. And actually, in the Prakarana Granthos, this attempt has been made. This is the classification of the Vaiseshikos. And in this context, you may ask, in which category I tried to include Hetvābhāṣa. In this lecture, in this discussion, I tried to include Hetvābhāṣa under the head of Nigrahasthan. The Nyayaikos have not admitted this classification, nor they have denied it. Both these divisions can be accommodated with each other, but the question would be relevant if in which category I intend to reduce Hetvābhāṣa in my objection. That is, I tried to reduce Hetvābhāṣa, I tried to bring Hetvābhāṣa under the category of Nigrahasthan, but have given the reason for its being mentioned separately in the Nyaya Sutra 111. So this classification is admitted by the Vaiseshikos, though non-contradicted by the Nyayaikos. In this context, the question would be relevant if you put it like this, whether it is possible to reduce Hetvābhāṣa under some category admitted by Gautama himself. I have raised this issue that Hetvābhāṣa can be brought under the head of Nigrahasthana. But at last, I have tried to point out the ground on which Gautama might have mentioned it distinctly.
Distinct?
Yes, in the first sutra of Nyaya Dershane.
Yes. Okay. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you very much.
Anyone else?
Madam, I just want to clarify one thing. That
Yes.
Sondhaya Sambhasha and Bijigeshu Sambhasha, how can we differentiate both of them in respect of their listeners or anything else?
The original purpose, which is guiding the discussion. If I want to achieve truth, then I'm participating in a Sondhaya Sambhasha. It is the terminology used by Charoko. If I take the help of Nyaya terminology, it would be a case of Bado. In the case of friendly debate, the attainment of truth is the goal. But in the case of hostile debate, my sole purpose is to defeat the opponent and to win over the opponent. This is the terminology of Charoko. And Sondhaya Sambhasha corresponds to Bado Vicharo. And Vigrijya Sambhasha can be of two types according to Gautama, Jalpo and Bitanda. Have you got the point?
Yes, madam. Thank you so much.
Anyone else? Okay, I think we have all been listening to Didi with rapt attention, and I really don't know how to thank you, to speak for such a long period. Thank you, Ratnadi. Thank you so much. I thank you
must
on
thank
my
you
own
all
Sorry?
for giving me a patience hearing.
No, not at all. It was all extremely, engaging, extremely engaging. I am on my own behalf and on behalf of Bhaktivedanta Research Institute, extend our heartfelt thanks to Professor Ratna Dutta Sharma. And I thank all the participants for being there today. And we meet tomorrow again at 11 o'clock. Okay, Didi.